Welcome to Caliban Command. Today's video is a little different. I wanted to consolidate my detachment reviews in one place. This is partially at the request of a friend of mine who thought it would be a good idea to make the information more readily accessible, and it's partially because I'm working on a couple projects that aren't quite ready to be released yet but are nearing completion. Thanks for your patience lately, as life has been very crazy for me, and I'm working on getting back to a regular release schedule. The first of our detachments is the Gladius Task Force. The benefit that affects the entire army is called Tactical Doctrines. Each doctrine can be selected once per game, and you can select one per round. In addition, each doctrine boosts one stratagem, giving it additional benefits. The Devastator Doctrine gives your army the ability to shoot after advancing. This can be huge on first turn. It allows you to advance your entire army that first turn and get a lot more board presence early on. It enhances Storm of Fire, which will be covered in the next section. Tactical Doctrine allows a unit to shoot and declare a charge after falling back. I usually save this to use in a turn where I have multiple units tied up in melee at the start of the turn that I'm needing to shoot with. It allows me to maintain firepower when I have key firepower tied up and unable to shoot only. The Doctrine enhances Squad Tactics, a strong movement buffing stratagem. The Assault Doctrine allows you to advance and charge in the same round. This is a good way to close ground with units like Blade Guard Veterans and Assault Intercessors. This Doctrine enhances Honor the Chapter. Enhancements are the next subject, covering Artificer Armor, which makes a character more tanky, which can be a benefit for lone operative characters. This can also be a huge benefit to important buffing characters. The improved saving throw and then the Feel No Pain can make a strategic linchpin in your army far harder to remove from the board. The Honor Vehement allows you to add 1 to the attacks and strength traits of a melee weapon on a model. Enhancements are the next subject. Artificer Armor makes a character more tanky, which can be a benefit for lone operative characters. This can also be a huge benefit to important buffing characters. The improved saving throw and then the Feel No Pain can make a strategic linchpin in your army far harder to remove. The Honor Vehement adds 1 to the attacks and strength traits of the melee weapons on a model, and during the Assault Doctrine that modifier goes up to 2. I think the Terminator captain leading a squad of Deathwing Knights would have a good deal of fun with this one. The Adept of the Codex is typically my first pick, as it allows for a bonus turn with the Tactical Doctrine. This can only go on a captain model, which is fine, as it's a strong choice in our list building anyway. With the way this is worded, it seems like it could be used for 2 turns. I've looked into the FAQ release from GW and found nothing to contradict this. Fire Discipline grants sustained hits 1, which causes critical hits to generate an additional hit. During Devastator Doctrine, it also causes crits to occur on a 5 or a 6 instead of only on a 6. I personally like putting this on Chaplains or Librarians, however I would not put it on a Terminator Librarian, as it already gains sustained hits 1 from the Librarian. This brings us to stratagems. Armor of Contempt is the same across all of the Space Marine detachments. It reduces the AP of incoming attacks during a phase by 1. This can be a game changer. You can give a unit that would otherwise not get a saving throw against an attack a saving throw. I would personally save it for important units who would otherwise have no saving throw against the attack, something holding an objective for instance. It may only give you a 5 up to save, but with other defensive buffs, for instance a Feel No Pain, it may shift enough wounds that the unit on the... This brings us to stratagems. Armor of Contempt is the same across all the Space Marine detachments. It reduces the AP of incoming attacks during a phase by 1, and this can be a huge game changer. You can give a unit that would otherwise not get a saving throw against an attack. I would personally save it for important units such as objective holders and things of that nature, who would otherwise not get a saving throw against the attack that's incoming. It may only give you a 5 up to save, but with other defensive buffs, for instance a Feel No Pain, it may shift enough wounds to keep that unit on the table a little bit longer, which could lead to you scoring more. This can be used during your opponent's shooting or fight phases and costs a single command point. I can't recommend this one enough. If you need to hold an objective and your opponent is throwing high armor penetration in this unit, it is absolutely worth a command point to hold it longer. Only in death does duty end. After your opponent selects targets for the fight phase, you can select one of your units that is targeted for attacks. If a model is destroyed, it can fight on death after your opponent finishes the attacks towards that unit. Now, this does have to be selected before you know if your models are going to die, and I don't think that's the best setup, but it is still a strong stratagem for 2 command points. Honor the Chapter. During the fight phase, one Adeptus Astartes unit gains Lance on its melee weapons. If the Assault Doctrine is active, it also improves those weapons' armor penetration by 1. This is good on, for instance, Assault Intercessors and things of that nature. It would be a strong option, for instance, on Deathwing Knights, in my opinion, or on Blade Guard veterans, and I would consider using it very heavily in those 2 situations. Adaptive Strategy. During your command phase, you can select a second doctrine to be active for a unit. This will allow you to select a doctrine that has been used by your army previously and costs 1 command point. Now, this does only select a single unit, but I genuinely think that would make a huge difference in certain situations. For instance, if you need the Devastator Doctrine in order to get some backboard units brought up to bear, you can use the Adaptive Strategy to trigger the Devastator Doctrine for them and allow them to advance and still fire at full ballistic skill. Storm of Fire. During your shooting phase, 1 unit's ranged attacks gain Ignore. Storm of Fire. During your shooting phase, 1 unit's ranged weapons can gain Ignore Cover, and if the Devastator Doctrine is active, they also gain a point of armor penetration. This also costs 1 command point. We have a lot of cheap stratagems here, and I think Storm of Fire is one of our stronger ones. You can absolutely take a las cannon and give it an extra point of AP. Not as useful as, for instance, giving an entire Hellblaster squad an extra point of AP as well as Ignores Cover. That can make for a very strong turn of shooting for that unit. Squad Tactics. You can activate this during your opponent's movement phase. After your opponent ends a move, advance or fall back. This can only target an infantry or mounted unit, and it cannot target a unit in engagement range. When that unit is selected, that unit can move d6 inches. If the Tactical Doctrine is active, that unit can move 6 inches instead. This one is a good one for repositioning during your opponent's turn, and it can help you kind of reshuffle and stay out of engagement range easily in terms of charge danger. Squad Tactics. You can activate this one during your opponent's movement phase. After your opponent ends a movement, advance or fall back. This can only target an infantry or mounted unit and cannot target a unit in engagement range. When that unit is selected, that unit can move d6 inches. If the Tactical Doctrine is active, that unit can move 6 inches instead. This is a good one for repositioning to avoid a charge from a unit that would be particularly bad for you to end up having to deal with in melee combat. It still costs a command point. It is a really solid choice, I think, depending on the situation. Against World Eaters, it could prevent you from getting tied up in melee, which is always a huge boon. This leads to me giving the Gladius a placement of 8 out of 8. I think it is our best choice for detachments at this time, but I really hope that the Codex fleshes us out a little bit more and gives us better options. The combination of strengths lend themselves to a very varied force, which Dark Angels are known for fielding. It doesn't lean towards any particular set of units, and I think that honestly works out very well in its benefit. The Anthel Siege Force is a detachment that I'm fond of. I've been playing with it quite a bit and trying to figure out what units work best in it. So far, Gravis Marines have been my favorite units to take, specifically the Biologus along with Aggressors. Heavy Intercessors are my troop of choice for it. The Detachment rule, Shield of the Imperium, gives all your ranged weapons heavy, which means any stationary units in your army go to hitting on 2s and higher on the 6-sided dice in place of a 3-up. This is a huge improvement across your entire army, and there's no penalty if you move, other than losing the point of bonus accuracy. The enhancements here are fun too. Indomitable Fury can go on a Gravis character, which once per game when it dies, you can roll for him to stand back up on a 2-up. Fleet Commander is a bit strange, but can be fun from a psychological perspective. On the first turn of activation, you place a marker on the board. The next turn, you place a second one within 12 inches of the center of that marker, then draw a straight line between the two. You roll 1d6 for each unit that line crosses. On a 3-up, that unit takes d3 mortal wounds, then both markers are removed. Keep in mind, while placing the markers, your units get hit as well. Also, the enemy has a turn to move around that first marker. This can be a strong psychological tool to prevent board advancement, but I'm not sure what mileage we'll get out of it when it's all said and done. Stoic Defender grants a 6-up feel no pain while on an objective for a squad, and halves the objective control while battle shocked instead of making it 0. Architect of War grants a unit the character is attached to ignores cover on their attacks. Of the 4 enhancements, I personally lean towards either Indomitable Fury or Stoic Defender. Armor of Contempt is here, and honestly it meshes well. Our lists will likely use a lot of Gravis for this detachment, which means high AP is a must to deal wounds to them quickly. This can help make the opponent work more for each wound and costs only a single command point. Rigid Discipline is a good movement option and can be used to extricate a valuable shooting unit from combat. It can be used at the end of the fight phase, but only if you can fall back fully into your deployment zone or into range of an objective. This costs a single command point. Not one backwards step. During the command phase, one of your units can double its objective control value, but it's forced to remain stationary. The unit has to be on an objective. Essentially, you're being forced to hold that objective in exchange for doubling your ability to hold it. Also gaining a +1 to hit on that unit courtesy of the heavy rule. This costs 1 command point. No threat too great. During your shooting phase, you can give a unit rerolls to wound against monsters and vehicles. I'd consider this one carefully. It can be useful against targets like transports and can tilt the odds enough to be considered in my opinion. But it comes at the cost of 2 command points, which is, I think, a little high for what it does. Battle Drill Recall. During your shooting phase, you can select one unit for the rest of the shooting phase. It gains sustained hits 1, and if it's stationary, it also critically hits on 5-ups. This costs 1 command point. This is a really strong option, especially given the sustained hits, proccing additional attacks, and also the fact that we have units like Stern Guard who gain bonuses when they critically hit. Hail of Vengeance. During your opponent's shooting phase, after a unit has resolved its attacks, one of your units can return fire at that unit so long as it's an eligible target. This costs 2 command points and gives you a little bit of shooting during your opponent's turn. It's not an amazing choice in my opinion, but you can get some pretty high numbers of bonus attacks during your opponent's turn that can count for something. For instance, if a squad of Hellblasters can open up, I'd do so. The Anvil Siege Force gets a 7 out of 8. I think it's our second best choice, and I personally like its focus on improving accuracy and find its abilities fun. It's not our strongest pick, but it's far from the weakest. I like the focus on Gravis units. And I think if we get something in our codex of a similar nature, it will be themed off our Deathwing and will likely mimic this with a focus on assault rather than heavy as a keyword. This wraps us up for the day as far as discussions of tactics and the detachments go. I'm covering them a couple at a time because I want to give each one the due diligence they deserve, and I want to have fun while I dig into them. I've discovered some things that I didn't know applied the way they do with the Anvil Siege Force, and I'm really looking forward to playing around with it more and building more lists with it. The Ironstorm Spearhead is a heavily vehicle-based army build. Armored Wrath is the detachment rule allowing you to reroll 1 hit roll, 1 wound roll, and 1 damage roll per unit per turn. I'd recommend keeping a marker to keep track of what has spent their rerolls each turn. The enhancements here are largely for Tech Marines, with 50% of them only being able to be applied to Tech Marines. First of the enhancements is the target augury web. A tech marine with it grants vehicles within 6 inches of it lethal hits. The flesh is weak grants the bearer 4 feel no pain. I'd place this on a lone operative myself as it provides no benefit to a squad. Adept of the Omnissiah can be taken by a tech marine, and once per battle round, when a vehicle within 6 inches fails a saving throw, you can change the damage characteristic of that attack to 0. Master of Machine War. The bearer has a 6-inch aura that grants vehicles within the aura the ability to shoot after having advanced or fell back. The stratagems for this detachment seem to be largely defensive. Unbound Conviction can be activated during the command phase. It allows that unit to ignore any particular modifier or all modifiers to a test or roll, excluding saving throws. Costs 1 command point each time you activate it. Armor of Contempt can be activated during your opponent's shooting or fight phase and reduces the AP of incoming attacks towards your unit by 1. It also costs 1 command point. Mercy is weakness. During your shooting or fight phase, one of your units, while attacking a unit below its starting strength, gains sustained hits 1, and if it's a vehicle, it critically hits on 5 or higher. This costs 1 command point. Vengeful Animus. Any time a vehicle from your army is destroyed, if it has the Deadly Demise ability, you do not roll for it to explode. Instead, it explodes automatically, and instead inflict its mortal wounds based on its Deadly Demise ability. It costs, once again, 1 command point. Ancient Fury. During your command phase, one walker model from your army can improve its move, toughness, leadership, and objective control by 1, and when it attacks, add 1 to the hit rolls. This costs 1 command point. Power of the Machine Spirit. During your opponent's shooting phase, after their unit resolves their attacks, a vehicle that was brought below half strength can shoot back at that target. I give this detachment a 4 out of 8. It's a bit too vehicle-tailored in my opinion. It fits the Iron Hands, which it should, but for our purposes, I think we are better off with other choices. Ravenwing may make good use of this, but they have some options we will cover later on in this series. The Firestorm Assault Force is one I'd love to hear what you all think about. I think this one has some potential with our Terminator lists. Please tell me what you think in the comments section. I'd love to get more opinions on it. Close Range Eradication gives all our ranged weapons assault. Any assault weapons at 12 inch and closer gain +1 strength while shooting. The enhancements here are fun too. Champion of Humanity, which can only go on Tacticus models, allows the unit to ignore any or all modifiers. This includes saving throws, but can still make for an interesting choice if your opponent is using hit modifiers or leadership modifiers. War-Tempered Artifice adds 3 strength to the model's melee weapons. This is a solid contender for making characters into anti-vehicle units. Forged in Battle allows you to change a saving throw to a 6. This is a solid choice, but can only be used by a model leading a unit, so independent characters receive no benefit. Adamantine Mantle reduces damage by 1 except Melt and Torrent weapons, which have their damage become 1 instead. All 4 enhancements are strong contenders here. I don't always say that about a detachment, but I think Adamantine Mantle and War-Tempered Artifice are the strongest character buffs for independent characters, while Champion Humanity is the strongest squad buff. Armor of Contempt once again costs 1 command point and reduces the AP of incoming attacks during your opponent's shooting or fight phases by 1. Still a solid defensive option while holding objectives here. Crucible of Battle grants you a +1 to wound the nearest target within 6 inches during your shooting or fight phase. This one costs 1 command point, and honestly I think this is a really cost-effective way to help out both melee and ranged units. Aggressors can serve fairly solid anti-vehicle damage with their fists already, but this can make them far more likely to wound. Rapid Embarkation allows you to load a unit into a transport that was empty so long as the transport is within 6 inches of the unit. This can be done at the end of a fight phase and costs 1 CP. This is a solid way to reposition your unit post-fight phase to preserve them. Immolation Protocol gives Torrent weapons devastating wounds for a squad. This can be activated during your shooting phase and costs 2 command points. Onslaught of Fire costs 1 command point. It requires a unit to have disembarked from a transport that turn and is activated during your shooting phase. When you select a target for shooting that is within 12 inch, you add 1 to the hit roll, and if that unit suffers any casualties from those attacks, that unit suffers a battle shock test. Burning Vengeance. During your opponent's shooting phase, just after a unit's attacks are resolved against that transport, a unit embarked within a transport can immediately disembark and shoot at the unit that's resolved its attacks against that transport. This costs 1 command point and is a hyper-specific stratagem. It can come up, but you also have to have something with really solid firepower to make it worth setting up. 6 out of 8 is what I'd give this detachment. I think it's a fairly fun detachment and gives up some neat options on how we use some units. One example is how it affects our desolation squads. Giving them assault, for instance, makes for an interesting interaction where advancing no longer shuts down their shooting. This also benefits units like eradicators. Lightning Assault is the buff we receive from this detachment. It's ultimately a mobility buff and helps increase our threat range quite nicely. For enhancements, we have Fury of the Storm, which improves the strength and armor penetration of the bearer's melee weapons by 1. After a charge is successful, it is improved to +2 to strength and armor penetration. Portents of Wisdom grants rerolls on advanced rolls made for the unit while the character is leading a unit. This is a good way to get charge rerolls on a unit. I think mounted units are the ideal targets for this. Fainting Withdrawal. While the character is leading a unit, it allows the unit to shoot in a turn where that unit fell back. Hunter's Instinct. If the bearer's unit is in strategic reserve, you treat the battle round as being 1 higher than it is for deployment to the battlefield. This can lead to earlier options for flanking deployments. Armor of Contempt is here in the stratagem section again. 1 command point to remove a point of armor penetration from incoming attacks during your opponent's shooting and fight phases. Blitzing Fusillade during your shooting phase grants one of your units the assault rule on their ranged weapons, and if they had it already, they gain sustained hits as well. This is really solid for Ravenwing Black Knights, and I think will make for a really good combo. Full Throttle during your movement phase adds 6 inch of movement, 9 inches if the unit is mounted. This can give mounted units a large threat radius in this detachment. Shock Assault during your charge phase, a mounted unit gains rerolls to charge rolls and the lance ability on their melee weapons. I think Black Knights are once again a really solid target for this stratagem. Ride Hard, Ride Fast allows you to, during your opponent's shooting phase after your opponent has selected targets, subtract 1 to the incoming hit rolls and wound rolls that target the unit the stratagem is used on. Windswift Evasion. During your opponent's movement phase, when an enemy unit ends their movement, advance, or fallback move, 1 unit within 9 inches of that unit can make a normal move of up to 6 inches. I'd slate this at a solid 5 out of 8. It heavily benefits our Ravenwing and makes a fun list building tool to run Ravenwing within. Vanguard Spearhead. Shadow Masters is the name of the detachment rule, and any unit outside of 12 inches suffers a -1 to hit your units and grants benefit against such attacks. The enhancements for this detachment are kind of interesting. The Blade-Driven Deep grants a unit the bearer is leading Infiltrate, a good way to forward deploy a unit such as Eradicators or such. Be careful forward deploying too far. This is a good way to move Tacticus or Gravis units into forward positions towards the start of the game. Ghostweave Cloak takes an independent character and grants them stealth and lone operative abilities. This could be granted to a model and then used to protect the lion, for instance. Execute and Redeploy. A Phobos character can be given this enhancement, and if the unit has shot and is not in engagement range, it can make a 6 inch move. It cannot declare a charge that turn and cannot be used more than once in that turn. Shadow War Veteran. Once per turn, a Phobos leader with this enhancement can increase an opponent's stratagem cost by 1. This is a permanent modifier and can absolutely alter your opponent's game plan for an entire match. The stratagems here are a little strange to me. Deadly Prize wants you to sabotage an objective for 1 command point, and during your command phase, that objective becomes a hazard to your opponent. It lasts for the game or until tripped, and it's tripped by a normal, advanced, charge, or fallback movement within range of that objective. Afterwards, you roll a d6, and on a 2 or higher, that unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. Armor of Contempt is here again, 1 CP, reduce incoming armor penetration by 1 during an opponent's shooting or fight phase for a unit. Surgical strikes cost 2 command points, and during your fight phase, an infantry unit you control gains precision on their melee weapons. Strike from the Shadows costs 1 command point and can be triggered during your shooting phase, and an infantry unit you control while targeting a unit further than 12 inches away gains +1 to hit and improves their armor penetration by 1. Calculated Feint can be activated during your opponent's charge phase after a charge is declared that targets one of your infantry units. That unit can move d6 inches or 6 inches if it is a scout or a Phobos unit. This costs 1 command point. Guerrilla Tactics for 1 command point. Up to 2 Phobos or scout units or 1 infantry unit can be removed and placed into strategic reserves. This is done at the end of your opponent's fight phase, and they must be 3 inches away from all enemy models at the beginning of it. I'd rate this one a 3 out of 8. We just don't have the named character support to lend itself well to Phobos builds, and it's not the worst option, but I'm not a fan of it. The First Company Task Force comes with classic Oath of Moment, but only for a single round. This grants full rerolls to hit and to wound rolls instead of hit rolls only. I don't view this as a worthwhile benefit myself, but I think that other detachments have stronger abilities that are more reliable. The Imperium Sword adds 1 to the attack's characteristic of the bearer's melee weapons, and once per game you can extend that effect to the bearer's unit. This is a case where I don't think the benefit is worth it. I think the second effect is too weak to warrant a once per game rule, and the primary effect too weak to consider as a enhancement for the bearer, to be perfectly honest. Fear Made Manifest is an interesting one to me. The Battle Shock ability doesn't affect monsters or vehicles, but this could be an interesting choice to shake up an objective. I think the second ability is actually useful here and is worth the once per game rule. Rights of War is a +1 to objective control, and once per game that can be extended to the unit rather than just the bearer. Iron Resolve provides a 5 of Feel No Pain, and once per game that can be extended to its unit, which to me is actually useful once again. I think that one's worth taking. The elephant in the room on this detachment seems to be the fact that the enhancements aren't really that great, and the detachment rule isn't amazing. The once per game buffs are lackluster for the most part. I'd personally rather see these get retuned to buff either the squad or the bearer better. I think if Sword of the Imperium would be a lot better geared if it added 2 to the bearer's attacks, or a flat +1 to the attacks of the unit rather than as a once per game ability. The enhancements seem to be a theme over function decision for me, and it harkens back to an issue I've seen a few times crop up specifically in Dark Angels in the past, where we get rules that are fun and impactful to a story, but not necessarily to the tabletop state. Fear Made Manifest and Iron Resolve are kind of the outliers here, as they seem to carry the power needed to make them worth using. Armor of Contempt returns once again. 1 command point to reduce armor penetration by 1 for incoming attacks during your opponent's shooting or fight phase. Heroes of the Chapter for 1 command point, 1 Terminator, Blade Guard, Stern Guard, or Vanguard squad unit during your shooting or fight phase gets to add 1 to their hit rolls. Honestly, that's not amazing due to the restriction on units, but then it also has the ability to add 1 to the wound rolls as well, but only if the unit's below half strength. I don't think this stratagem is as impactful as it could be, and it's another functionality over story question. Terrifying Proficiency during your fight phase after a Terminator, Blade Guard, or Stern Guard, or Vanguard unit has destroyed an enemy unit for 1 command point. You can activate this stratagem during your opponent's next command phase. Any enemy units within 6 inches are forced to take a battle shock test at a -1 penalty if they are below half strength, but do not take any additional battle shock tests that phase. Duty and Honor for 1 command point, 1 Terminator, Blade Guard, Stern Guard, or Vanguard veteran squad during your movement phase within control of an objective marker can hold an objective even if they leave the objective until it is manually taken by the opponent. You have control over it. This isn't a bad one. I actually think the restrictions work quite well here. It allows those veteran units to be a little bit more mobile. The orbital teleportarium for one command point, a Terminator unit at the end of your opponent's fight phase can be removed and placed in reserve, and during your next turn it's redeployed using the Deep Strike ability. I think this is a fun one. It's good for repositioning a Terminator unit, which are usually quite slow in the first place. Legendary Fortitude after an opponent's unit has charged a Terminator, Blade Guard, Stern Guard, or Vanguard squad within engagement range can reduce incoming damage by 1 from each attack. This costs 1 command point. This isn't a bad one. I just don't think the unit restrictions are strictly speaking necessary. I give the Detachment a 1 out of 8 personally. I think the stratagems are too narrow when it comes to targets. I think the enhancements are too limited. It's basically a narrative list, but I don't think it's a good choice for matches. The Unforgiven Task Force has a strange reliance on Battle Shock, which is why I'm not going to place it higher than what I'm going to at the end of this. Grim Resolve is a good narrative and functional ability, and it shows how the Dark Angels dig in rather than give up. The enhancements have a strange reliance on Battle Shock for functionality that I just can't quite shake on. I don't like how they function because of this. The Shroud of Heroes, for instance, gives the opportunity for a character to stand back up after destruction on a 2-up on a 6-sided dice roll, with 3 wounds remaining outside of engagement range, and if Battle Shocked, it instead changes to giving the character all their wounds back. Stubborn Tenacity adds 1 to hit rolls while the unit is attached to is below starting strength, and if Battle Shocked, it adds 1 to the wound roll as well. That's not a bad one, it just seems a little strange to attach Battle Shock as a requirement. The Heavenfall Blade adds 1 to the attack, strength, and damage of the bearer's weapons, and that increases to 2 while Battle Shocked. The Pennant of Remembrance, a Terminator Ancient, Primaris Ancient, or Blade Guard Ancient, with this enhancement, gives their unit a 6-up Feel No Pain that increases to a 4-up while Battle Shocked. None of these are bad, it's just that the reliance on Battle Shock to get what seems to be the full effect that other detachments just have in their enhancements is a little strange. The stratagems, on the other hand, are honestly really solid here. Unforgiven Fury, for 1 command point during your shooting phase, you can grant a unit lethal hits, and if a unit in your army anywhere is Battle Shocked, that unit also critically hits on 5. This is a really good stratagem if they want us to lean into Battle Shock, because it doesn't require the unit that is benefiting from it to be Battle Shocked. It just requires somewhere on the board for your Dark Angels to be Battle Shocked. Armor of Contempt is still here, reducing armor penetration by 1 during your opponent's shooting or fight phases for 1 command point. Intractable allows a unit to shoot and declare a charge for 1 command point, even if it is fallen back. And it's activated during your movement phase, so it's at the start of your turn where you know where you're going to fall. Fire Discipline offers a large shooting buff in the form of granting Assault, Heavy, and Ignores cover to a unit for 1 command point during your shooting phase. Grim Retribution during your opponent's shooting phase allows you to punish an enemy unit that is shot by returning fire from the unit that was targeted for 1 command point. Unbreakable Lines allows you to, after an opponent's unit is charged, declare a unit within engagement range of the charging unit, and until the end of that turn, each time an attack targets the model in that unit, subtract 1 damage from that attack for 1 command point. I'd give the Detachment a 2 out of 8. I think the reliance on Battle Shock weakens the enhancements, and I think the stratagems are a decent compensation for the poor enhancements, but I don't feel like I can rank this higher right now until I play around with it more and see how much that compensation occurs. I think this is still stronger than the first company task force, and it's not terrible, but I sincerely hope we get some better options in our codex. We're going to talk about Hobbytown now. They are the sponsors of our channel currently, and they have a phenomenal array of painting tools. They have paints, they have models, they have everything that you could possibly need. Not to mention, their staff have always been super knowledgeable about anything that I've picked up there. They've made some recommendations for how I could improve my hobby flow. They've gone through the effort of helping me find a starting point in 40k in a faction that I love. I've played Dark Angels now for years, and that's largely thanks to them helping me figure out what faction fit me the best. The series as a whole has been a blast to work with them on. They've helped me find stuff for Age of Sigmar that I enjoy. They've ordered stuff in that I haven't had access to before. They've helped me find paint alternatives when they didn't have a Citadel paint that I needed. They've helped me find new board games to play. It has genuinely just been a really helpful crew to work with. They stock Army Painter, GW, Testers, Tamiya. They have Mission Models paints, which I got the pleasure of trying out recently and had a really great time with. They stock Gundam kits, anime kits of various types. They have the Vallejo paint line, which I use a lot when I do Gunpla to just really bring out some neat color combinations with. They have all kinds of fun in there, and I genuinely cannot recommend the store enough. I hope you guys check them out. Even if you can't find a local branch, I hope you check out their online store at hobbytown.com.